streaming. We're live, boys. We're live.
All right. Welcome back to another episode of Mystery School Dropouts, where we explore the strange, the hidden, and the deeply esoteric. Today we're diving into the dark field of demonology, the study of demons and supernatural entities that has haunted human history for centuries. Are these beings simply symbols of our fears, or could there be something more sinister, lurking in the shadows? From ancient texts to modern encounters, we're uncovering the mysteries, myths, and potential truths about demonic forces.
Mm. All right, boys. Episode 10. Can you believe we've actually come this far already?
Oh, super exciting.
Double
Yeah, it's
digits.
we're officially in the double digits. I think this adds an aura of legitimateness to us, does it not?
Yeah.
At least in my
Definitely.
head it does.
I mean,
So,
look at
yes.
us. We're super serious.
So, yes, today's topic, as Alex just stated, is on demonology. And
Ooh.
I know, the textbook definition of demonology is the study of demons, their hierarchies and powers, and methods for summoning and expelling. Very often, it's seen as like a subtopic of the study of religion and myth, as well as occultism. So, very often, it kind of falls underneath those larger subjects. So demonology has a very long, colorful, and complicated history. And I could not even begin to consider myself an authoritative source on the subject. But, having said that, I've aggregated a few key points in like a historical context to kind of like open up this discussion. And then we will move on from there. So, historically speaking, like one of the earliest examples that we have of like a demonological mythos is in ancient Mesopotamian myths that scholars have traced back to as far as 3000 BC. Um, and again, from the research I've done, it's arguably the oldest example that we have of demonology. Uh, According to my research, ancient Mesopotamian beliefs held that the underworld, or Kur, was home to many demons. These demons could, at times, leave the underworld and torment and terrorize mortals on Earth. They are frequently referenced in ancient magical texts that have been found in Mesopotamia. And some of those texts describe them as being seven in number. Apparently, there were like seven prominent demons in the ancient Mesopotamian mythos. But yes, that's one of the earliest traces we have of like this conception of demons in world religion. Um, Among the most famous examples of demonological study throughout history is something known as Solomonic magic. So Solomonic magic is a very broad topic, and it's rather difficult to trace its roots. But we know for sure that Solomonic magic is based on the Old Testament figure Solomon, who was the son of David. He's a prominent figure throughout like several books of the Old Testament, and there are a number of extra biblical texts that kind of propelled Solomon into this more legendary status regarding his interactions with the supernatural. Um, so, like the origins of Solomonic magic can be traced back anywhere between the first century AD to 1000 AD. I mean, it's a huge range. A lot of the sources we have are very scant and fragmented, but according to the extant sources that are out there, the archangel Michael gave Solomon a magic ring, which had the power to bind demons to his will. And he, according to the mythos, he essentially forced an entire pantheon of demons to construct Solomon's temple, which was a real building, by the way. The Solomon's temple was a real constructed building. I don't have the dates on me, but it's generally agreed upon to have actually existed at some point before it was destroyed by foreign invaders. But according to legend, Solomon actually had something of like amounting to like a concentration camp for demons, where using this magic ring, he was able to summon up a whole array of demonic entities and just force them to do his bidding. I just love to imagine like a chain gang of like horned devils just like slaving away, like like constructing like bricks, like a bunch of bricklaying devils. So I found that to be very entertaining. But yeah, and we'll get more into Solomonic magic as the podcast goes on. But just know that that is like a cornerstone of demonology in a historical context. Yes, go ahead.
Real quick, uh, so this temple, is there any archaeological evidence that it existed? Just curious. Do you know?
I don't offhand.
Mhm.
I think that a lot of archaeologists kind of guess where it is. I
Mhm.
don't know that there's any actual like remains of it. I would have to do more research on that. But I
Okay.
do recall reading that it's generally agreed to have existed because apparently, at the very least, a lot of different sources of the time like cite it being real. So there's like an aggregate of different texts that claim it was real. So when you get back this far in ancient history, like that's a lot of time the only thing you have to go on. And
Right. Right.
so, but no, that's a great question, and I'll have to look into that later.
Mhm.
But yeah, so Solomonic magic, huge cornerstone of demonology. No discussion about demonology would be complete without at least briefly touching on the infamous Aleister Crowley. And I'm sure that at some point we'll have another episode where we dive a lot further into his background, who he was, and his significance. But, you know, to briefly kind of sum this gentleman up, he's arguably the most famous occultist of all time. He's the founder of the religion Thelema. I never know how to say it right. Is it Thelema or Thelema? I've heard both. But the reason I bring him up in the context of the history of demonology is that like a really important moment occurred in Aleister Crowley's life revolving around a demon that really set the rest of his life in motion. And that's that apparently following a mountaintop sex ritual in
Cool.
Algeria, Crowley performed an evocation to the demon Choronzon, involving blood sacrifice. And like I just said, Crowley considered this to be a landmark or watershed moment in his development as an occultist. And the world of the occult and all things demon related in like the past 2 centuries would certainly not be what they are were it not for this man's impact and influence. Um, Another thing to note in the history of demonology, of course, is the idea of Satanism, which very briefly is the veneration or worship of Satan. Uh, the term itself emerged during the Reformation era, so like the early 1500s, but the concept of Satanism has probably been around since like Christianity emerged itself. Um, and I have written here that since Christianity throughout its history was in direct opposition to other belief systems, those religions were often denounced as satanic or demonic. So very often, like early Christians, when they came in contact with what we would call like paganists, which is a huge umbrella term unto itself, but very often Christians would denounce them as being satanic or demon worshippers. Um, Accusations of demon worship and Satanism occurred throughout the Middle Ages. One interesting thing I found was that during the Inquisition, the Catholic Church accused the famous Knights Templar, the militaristic secret society, of secretly worshiping Baphomet. Baphomet being the famous goat-headed demonic figure that is seen all over the place now in our culture, and like when we're talking about like occult imagery. In fact, the Satanic Temple, I think it was in 2014, even erected a Baphomet statue outside a courthouse, and that was the cause of much controversy when it happened. I think it was really like they were advocating for free speech and freedom of religion. And I don't want to get too sidetracked, but a lot of listeners, you know, if you don't know the term Baphomet, picture like the goat-headed satanic figure. I'm sure most people have an idea of what that is. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that, we should explicitly say that modern Satanism has taken on a more, um, I don't know if you want to call it satirical bent, or it's really more of um, a statement organization kind of against some traditional like Christian ideas, religious ideas in government and politics, and not necessarily so like explicitly Satan worshiping, right? Correct me if
Yeah.
I'm wrong on that.
No,
Yeah.
you're absolutely correct.
Mhm.
100%. Like modern Satanism in the 20th and 21st century. I would venture to say a lot of people would construe it as somewhat reactionary, a little edgelord, kind of ruffle the feathers of a lot of Christian fundamentalists by being so overtly antithetical to their belief system. Um, but yeah, to your point, both the Church of Satan, which was started by Anton LaVey, and the Satanic Temple, which are two distinct modern satanic entities, and I don't want to get into the weeds with it right now, but they do diverge in their worldviews and structures. Both of them consider themselves to be atheistic, where they don't actually literally worship Satan.
Mhm.
Um, Now, one thing I found interesting is that somewhat paradoxically, it seems that the Church of Satan does believe in the power of magic. So I don't know how. I would have to ask someone, a member. I don't know how they contend with an atheistic belief system with a belief in magic. I don't know if those things are really diametrically opposed, but they certainly seem to be rather divergent, right? So it
Mhm.
doesn't fully make sense to me, but as I understand it, both the Church of Satan and the Satanic Temple do not claim to be theistic in their conception of Satan. But having said all of that, um, there are undoubtedly theistic satanic cults somewhere, right? I don't
Mhm.
have the evidence for it, but I don't think it's too much of a stretch of the imagination uh, to to believe that they exist to some degree in the world. I'm sure they always have. I'm sure they do today as we speak. But the official large organizations that we know as the Church of Satan, the Satanic Temple, do not ascribe to anything theistic. Um, it's all very, like you said, theatrical,
Mhm.
and a lot of their philosophy is rather hedonistic, self-serving. It's all about pleasing the self. That's what a lot of it comes down to, at least in the modern day. So those are a few very brief and far from comprehensive key points of demonology throughout history. I wanted to pivot, unless anyone has anything else to add to this section of the conversation. I wanted to pivot to some famous demons. This was a lot of fun to research. Uh, so different religions have very different conceptions of what demon entities are. What I'm going to be focusing on is more in the Western tradition. And I just have a few written down here. Some famous examples of demons that a lot of people probably have heard of if they don't know much about them. So, right off the bat is the OG, the top dog, Lucifer. We all know Lucifer. Lucifer is actually Latin for light bearer. He is the ultimate source of evil. Common and alternate names include Satan, the devil. He's also commonly the serpent in the Genesis story is often commonly attributed to Satan himself. I don't think he needs much more introduction than that. Everyone's pretty well familiar with who that is. But beneath Satan, according to different demonological schools of thought, there's a whole like order of demons, and I have a few of them listed here. So there is Beelzebub, aka Lord of the Flies. He's considered one of the kings of hell. It's interesting. He's sometimes associated with the Canaanite god Baal from the Old Testament. Anyone who was raised in a religious environment or has studied the Old Testament is probably familiar with Baal. He's mentioned frequently throughout the Old Testament. And the thing that gets confusing is there's a lot of contradictory information out there about like who Beelzebub was, but very often he is associated with Baal, and he's sometimes seen as Lucifer's second in command. He is often depicted as a huge fly with human skulls on his wings, or images of human skulls on his wings, and he's wearing a crown. But apparently, he can also, as you know, demons are very metaphysically powerful things. He can also take the form of a human, a shadowy human with like flies buzzing around him. Next on my list is Payman. He is another one of the kings of hell. He's mentioned in the Lesser Key of Solomon, which is a grimoire that we will talk about later on. He's been made famous in our culture largely due to the wonderful, fantastic psychological horror film by Ari Aster called Hereditary, which I highly recommend if you're interested in psychological horror films.
Please
Please
go
check
watch it.
that movie out. Yes,
So
it's
good.
so good. But the entity, the demonic entity Payman plays like a pivotal role in the story. And he is depicted as a man riding a camel. And interestingly, when he's summoned, his entrance is said to be announced by the sounds of trumpets and cymbals. One more before we move on, because I don't want this podcast to just be me, you know, I don't want this to be a dry list of just, you know, endless demons. But one more to throw out there before we move on is Asmodeus, another one of the kings of hell. He is mentioned in the Jewish apocryphal book of Tobit. In some traditions, when summoned, he's said to impart hidden knowledge about the inner workings of nature. And his imagery is wild. Of all the demons that I did research on for this podcast, I love the depictions of this guy. He's so ridiculously grotesque and just absolutely metal. So he's depicted as having the chest of a man, like a rooster's legs, a serpent's tail. He has 3 heads, one of a man spitting fire, one of a sheep, and one of a bull. And he's often depicted riding a lion with dragon wings and a dragon's neck. Doesn't get much more edgelord than that, does it? Like, it's metal as
Wow.
fuck. I know. It's very extreme and ridiculous. I highly encourage listeners to look up images of Asmodeus. It's pretty wild.
And his imparting of hidden knowledge about the inner workings of nature seems like he's probably the most scientifically minded of demons, which is pretty cool.
He's a very reasoned individual despite his his appearance.
I heard him and Einstein had a really good relationship.
I'm getting Godric the Grafted vibes here.
Yeah.
Honestly, though, honestly, as a side note, I wouldn't be surprised if franchises like Elden Ring
Mm-hmm.
probably looked at a lot of demonological artwork for inspiration. I mean, it's a well of inspiration, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we've talked a little bit about uh, the history of demonology, a few of the most infamous demons within Western demonological thought. So for our next segment, and Alex, I was hoping you could take the reins on this one,
Yeah.
are some famous historical examples of exorcisms.
Sure. So just for anybody who doesn't already know this, exorcisms are what are performed on people who have supposedly been inhabited or possessed by demons. So any of these demons we had talked about earlier, and there are a slew of other demons that can potentially possess you, supposedly. We're going to go over two famous accounts of exorcisms. The first we will talk about will be Anneliese Michel. So Anneliese Michel was a young German woman whose tragic story of exorcism drew worldwide attention. Originally, she was diagnosed with epilepsy and later with psychiatric conditions. She exhibited disturbing symptoms that her devout Catholic family and priest believed were signs of demonic possession. Despite medical treatment, her condition worsened, leading her family to seek an exorcism, which was finally granted by the Catholic Church. And these exorcisms were performed over 10 months, from 1975 to 1976. Two priests conducted 67 different exorcism sessions, during which Anneliese's health rapidly declined. She ultimately died of malnutrition and dehydration on July 1st, 1976, and her death led to a high-profile court case where her parents and the priest were convicted of negligent homicide, sparking debates about the role of faith, mental health, and medical intervention. So it's just crazy. This woman had 67 different exorcism sessions done. And her and the next person I'm going to talk about were kind of the inspiration for the movie The Exorcist. When you look into these people's, the accounts of what was actually happening with these individuals, there's a lot of strange occurrences, like she's laying in bed and the bed's shaking like crazy and the things are rattling on the wall, and supposedly these families saw things that truly made them think that they were more than just mental illness, and led them to seek out the help of the Catholic Church. So to go into the next one, we will talk about the exorcism of Roland Doe. So Roland Doe is a pseudonym. I'm not sure the person's actual name. I don't think it's been released. But Roland was a young boy who became the subject of one of the most famous exorcism cases in the United States. In the late 1940s, Roland repeatedly experienced strange phenomenon after attempting to contact his recently deceased aunt through a Ouija board. Soon after, his family claimed to witness unusual and terrifying events, unexplained noises, objects moving on their own, and physical marks appearing on Roland's body. Medical and psychiatric evaluations failed to explain the occurrences, and fearing demonic possessions, his family sought help once again from the Catholic Church. So, Father William S. Bodern and other priests conducted several exorcism rituals over a few weeks in 1949, primarily in Missouri. Accounts from those present describe violent reactions, guttural sounds, and the boy speaking in strange languages. After multiple sessions, the exorcism was declared successful, and Roland went on to live a relatively normal life. His story ended up being the inspiration, or part of the inspiration, for the novel The Exorcist that was later adapted into the film. So to kind of sum up his story, he was messing around with a Ouija board to try to contact his dead aunt, supposedly got possessed by a demon. I read a little bit more into this one too, and supposedly him and his family, saw and heard these strange things happening, and that's really what made them go ahead and try to get an exorcism done. But the thing is, he after this happened, he seemed to just go on and live a normal life after, like, making it look like the exorcism worked, and he was able to just continue living. So that
Mm.
pretty much covers two of the most famous exorcism cases. If you really want to get more into it, I would suggest looking into the Roland Doe case. I believe it's one of the more documented ones out there. There's a lot of documentation.
Boy, if we just for a moment take the skeptical view, um, doesn't this ring like a cautionary tale of allowing religious organizations to take the reins on what should be like psychiatric institutions? Like, I mean, imagine, I mean, how much psychological damage was done to these poor individuals as a result of this.
hmm
It's just,
And maybe also, it's worth studying from a psychological or psychiatrical perspective, because if it actually did help, him, there may be some actual psychiatrically based reason that it made a difference, which would be interesting to think about and do some research on.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's dark stuff though.
Yeah,
Very
it's
dark stuff.
it's pretty scary. They're claiming just from messing with a Ouija board that all of this went down. We
Mm-hmm.
think of when we think of the different techniques and tactics for summoning demons, a Ouija board seems like a pretty low barrier to entry, something that a decent amount of people have messed with in their lives, right? If you believe that this is possible, it's scary that it potentially could happen just from messing with a Ouija board. You know,
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
There's one thing I found interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, are there even that many modern examples of exorcism, or is this the sort of thing that's kind of gone away as the global influence of the Catholic Church has waned? I wonder.
Mm-hmm.
That's
I'm
an
not
open
sure.
question. I don't actually have any data on that, but it's certainly something I don't hear about happening much anymore.
Right. I would imagine that it probably still goes on, especially in some parts of the world where, um, certain more extreme religious beliefs are still very prevalent. Um, you know, I would imagine that's the case, but I don't know for sure.
Mm. Well, um, moving straight ahead, uh, the next section, which I'm really excited to talk about, are the aforementioned methodologies, or as I have written down, the tools of the trade for summoning, controlling, or expelling demons. So, one of the oldest methods that I came across, one of the most ancient ones that we know of, are these items called incantation bowls. So, an incantation bowl is an ancient method of protective magic. A lot of them have been discovered in what is now modern day Iraq and Iran through a series of archaeological digs. Uh, Incantation bowls are typically inscribed in a spiral, beginning from the rim and moving towards the center. The text that is inscribed is typically like psalms or prayers, or invocations to protect the individuals against evil forces. So incantation bowls were typically buried face down, and they were meant to capture demons. They were very often placed like under the threshold of one's house, in a courtyard, in the corner of someone's house, um, also in cemeteries. Um, some incantation bowls have been found include like depictions of specific demons in the center of the bowl. So, like, if an individual thought that they were being tormented by a particular demon, they would then write some sort of invocation or prayer along the bowl, and then they would sketch like a crude drawing of that particular demon, place the bowl face down in a designated location, and the idea was that the demon would then be magically trapped inside the bowl, thus ending the individual's, you know, misfortunes. So that's a very ancient form of this sort of practice. Um, grimoires. This is a really fun one. So, for those who don't know, a grimoire is a book of magic that contains instructions for spells, rituals, summoning, divination, recipes for potions, and other magical practices. There are a slew of them that existed prominently throughout the Middle Ages, although some like trace back further into antiquity, as well as many modern examples. There's plenty of places you can go if you dig around on the internet where modern day grimoires are frequently written and published. So it's still very much a like vehemently believed in and practiced aspect of demonology in the modern world. A few famous examples of grimoires include the Testament of Solomon. So, if you recall, I was just talking at length about Solomonic magic. Um, it's believed that the Testament of Solomon was adapted from earlier texts in the first millennium, but was not properly compiled until like the 1300s, roughly. Uh, the Testament of Solomon is considered to be the foundation of Solomonic magic. It should be noted that it's not explicitly a grimoire in the sense that while this book details at length Solomon's exploits in like summoning demons and controlling them and expelling them, it doesn't actually describe like how he did it. So while it's really interesting to read in the context of like understanding like the myth around Solomonic magic, don't expect to open up the Testament in Solomon of Solomon and learn how to summon one for yourself. That, were you so inclined, you would turn to the Lesser Key of Solomon, which was compiled in the mid 17th century. This is probably the most famous or infamous grimoire in the world. It details the 72 prominent demons that exist within Solomonic magical thought. It contains a sigil for each demon, and we'll discuss what sigils are later on. How to summon them, etc., etc. It's based on the Testament of Solomon, but basically it's just like the manuscript for like how you go about like rising up and controlling these entities. One other grimoire that I jotted a few notes down about is the Book of Abramelin. This was allegedly written in 1458, and that's according to the Book of Abramelin itself. And it's interesting. It tells the story of an Egyptian man named Abraham who taught a system of magic to another fellow named Abraham. This guy goes by the moniker Abraham of Worms, who was a Jew from Worms, Germany. It's framed as a series of letters from Abraham of Worms to his son Lamech, and in it reveals, I don't know how I keep saying it wrong. I think Abramelin. It reveals Abramelin's magic and Kabbalistic secrets. It had a huge impact in the history of Western esotericism, as well as, once again, Aleister Crowley's philosophy in particular. So the Book of Abramelin, I hope I'm saying it right. For those wanting to read about this stuff, definitely check that one out.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, during some of my research this week, I was specifically came across a ritual that Aleister Crowley did, and it was called the Abramelin Ritual. It seems to be it's worth looking into. It seems to be one of the most complex and demanding rituals that one can do. It takes roughly between 12 and 18 months, depending on what source you're looking at. And just the basics of this ritual are you're like denying yourself of all earthly pleasures. You're spending your entire day reading, magical texts. And there's a lot of other things like, what exactly you should be eating, and that's to try to limit yourself from any pleasure. You want to eat bland foods, but you completely give yourself to this ritual for 12 or 18 months. Famously, Crowley was not able to complete the ritual. And Chops, refresh my memory. The house that he did it at is somewhere in Scotland. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's outside the town of Inverness, which I traveled to on vacation last year. I did not see the house itself. It's not open to the public. It's I want to say like 30 or 40 minutes outside the town of Inverness in Scotland, and it was actually owned for I think about a decade by the guitarist from Led Zeppelin, Jimmy Page. Jimmy Page grew up very interested in mysticism, and after becoming a multimillionaire in Led Zeppelin, he decided to buy Aleister Crowley's old mansion. And apparently it caught fire at some point.
Yeah, this is one of the things I read that people speculate due to Crowley's inability to actually finish the ritual successfully, it has kind of damned the estate, and it's experienced, I think, multiple fires and just other things like that lead people to believe that this ritual was in fact, tried at this place.
Mm-hmm. I really wanted to go over there and check it out, but the fact that it's not open to the public, it didn't feel like a worthwhile detour considering there were so many things to see when I was on that trip. But I really wanted to go check it out. Uh, I'd imagine that if you are inclined to believe these sorts of things, that there's probably some potent negative energy floating around that premises. So, yeah, it would be
Do
interesting
we
to see
know
one day if it ever opens up.
do we know what the purpose of that ritual is? Why would someone want to do this?
Yeah, so this might not give you exactly the answer you're looking for here,
Mm.
but I believe it has something, and I could be butchering this, but it has something to do with trying to contact like your guardian angel. And through like merging yourself with your guardian angel, you're able to bind different demons to yourself. And these demons do what demons do. Hopefully, you're bidding. They influence your life, make you luckier, or whatever, however you plan on using them. But the specific thing is binding yourself with your guardian angel, and then being able to control demons. So it's like a ritual that allows you to control demons at your will. Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah,
Demon's gonna do what a demon's gonna do.
Yeah, but
maybe I'll
like I
try this
said,
one.
yeah, it's incredibly grueling. When I was looking it up, it seemed wild, and the fact that somebody as devoted to the craft as Aleister Crowley, he couldn't do it. So I don't know how many people really have the ability to try something like this. With their 9 to 5 and life getting in the way.
Well,
I
the
yeah.
9 to 5 is that's easy hours of lack of
True.
pleasure.
True. True. So yeah, maybe if you do it right, maybe we're
That's
all
a good
doing it.
point. I'm already dedicating how many hours of my life to a lack of pleasure. So,
But this seemed kind of to be the pinnacle, like the ultimate ritual that, and to get into it a little bit more, I think supposedly Crowley might have gotten to the point, after you bind the demons to you, you're supposed to be able to banish them. That way they don't linger if you don't want them to. You can call upon them as needed. Supposedly he didn't get to the point of banishing the demons, I think. So,
Wow.
yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, if Crowley can't do it, what makes you think you can?
Yeah.
It's a word to the wise. Also, I want to put a little disclaimer in here. If there's any like adept occultist who happens to be listening and is like screaming at the computer screen at all the information we're getting wrong, we are mystery school dropouts. Emphasis on the word dropout. We are just endlessly fascinated by all things fringe. So as we go through this, I have a rudimentary understanding of it. I'm doing my earnest best, as we all are, to understand this very strange and dark topic. And if anyone has any more insights into any of the aspects of these topics that we're talking about, please slide into my DMs. I'm all ears.
We would love to talk to you. We would love
Yeah.
to talk to you on the podcast too.
Yeah, absolutely. So, more methods for demon summoning. This is a particularly dark one. And that would be sacrifices. Um, Now, sacrifices take many forms. They're not always, dark. It could just be sacrificing, some of your worldly possessions, but it could also be something really, really dark, like animal sacrifice, or yes, even human sacrifice. Um, One famous example that I was reading about, and that I had already been somewhat aware of through being raised in a Christian church, is the story about the demon Moloch. Um, in To go back to the Canaanites, in ancient Canaanite religion, Moloch was supposedly worshipped as a god. In the Old Testament, he's considered a false god and often interpreted as a demon. He has the body of a man and the head of a bull. And it's said that Canaanites would boil their children alive in the bowels of a large bronze effigy of Moloch. Pretty
Wow.
dark stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
Sounds
yeah,
unpleasant.
yeah, rather unpleasant. Um, it's interesting accusations of human sacrifice within the context of like demonology and occultism are prevalent throughout history, including the modern era. And I didn't write down a lot about this, but I did a deep dive a long time ago about this. There's this satanic ritual abuse whistleblower by the name of Fiona Barnett. I highly recommend everyone look into this individual at some point. If you can find her, I don't know, what would you call it? Speech. It's not really
Testimony.
a speech. Testimony. Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Thank you. She has a testimony about, and it sounds very outlandish and extraordinary. But she claims that at some point, I believe it was in the 90s or early 2000s, that um, members of Australian Parliament were involved in some sort of demonic occultic secret society, which she claims that she was present at against her will. And from memory, what I recall her saying in her testimony is that she witnessed them bring out a number of small children onto like a stage. This was being held in some auditorium, and she claims that these children were beheaded, and there was blood everywhere. They were just ritualistically sacrificed, and then like these people engaged in a very debaucherous orgy, like sliding and slipping around in the blood of these decapitated children. Yes, very dark stuff. Very dark, very outlandish and extreme. What's interesting is Fiona Barnett, this individual, she she makes these crazy claims with like the utmost sincerity. Um, Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So, you know, take that as you will. But apparently, in certain schools of thought in occultism and demonological practice, ritualistic sacrifice has a very powerful energy associated with it. Um, so, yeah, I'm going to leave that one there. Look up Fiona Barnett if you're interested, listeners, at any point. It's a very dark rabbit hole, but a very interesting one. To lighten the mood a little, we'll move on to something that was mentioned earlier, and that is sigils. What is a sigil? So the word sigil is Latin for seal. Now, interestingly, if you have an eye for this sort of thing, you might have seen sigils around. That I've seen them in my travels in random places. That they pop up all over the place. So historically speaking, sigil is a type of symbol used in magic. In the context of demonology, sigils are considered pictorial signatures of angels and demons. In the Lesser Key of Solomon, as I was saying earlier, each of the 72 demons found in the text has a unique sigil associated with it. Many practitioners believe that a sigil is the quote unquote true name of a demon. And by drawing this sigil and performing rituals as well, it is believed that the magician will be able to exert some degree of control over the demon in question. So historically, that's what a sigil is. Very often, modern day magicians uh, sigils have kind of a different definition. So there's something called chaos magic, and I know this is getting into the weeds here, but bear with me. So sigil use in chaos magic. All right, so what is chaos magic? Very briefly, it emerged in the 1970s among pagan and occult subcultures. Uh, it was kind of a reactionary movement from how I understand it. A lot of occultists during those years believed that a lot of occult traditions had become too religious in their character. They attempted to strip away the symbolic, ritualistic, theological, or otherwise ornamental aspects of these occult traditions to leave behind a set of basic techniques that they believed to be the basis of magic. Chaos magic teaches that the essence of magic is that perceptions are conditioned by beliefs, and that the world as we perceive it can be changed deliberately by changing those beliefs. Chaos magicians subsequently treat belief as a tool, often creating their own idiosyncratic magical systems and blending such different things as practical magic, quantum physics, chaos theory, and anarchism. All right, that was a lot. Why do I bring all that up? Because a lot of modern day sigil use is used within the context of chaos magic. So, uh, sigils today are commonly created by writing an intention. So if there's some sort of goal or item that you deeply want to have in your personal life, you would create a sigil. You would write down as specifically as you can what your goal or intention is, and you would condense the letters of of that statement down into the form of a monogram. So you would kind of like blend all of the letters in this creative way to the point where uh, someone looking at it wouldn't recognize at all what it is, what it was originally. Like, let's say your goal was that you want $100,000 by the end of the year, so you would write that down, and then you would take the letters of your statement and start to like artistically fuse them together into this monogram. So that becomes like indecipherable to anyone who would happen to see it, right? So the chaos magician would then use the Gnostic state. There's that word, Gnostic. And that is when a person's mind is focused only on one point, thought, or goal, and all others are thrust out. So it's like a form of meditation. So you would take this monogram, you would focus your conscious being solely on that one like intention or goal, block out everything else in your conscious awareness except for that one thing, and you would thereby charge the sigil. After charging the sigil, it is considered necessary to repress all memory of it. Full disclosure, I actually did try this one time years ago. Um, it didn't work out exactly how I wanted it to work out, but depending on one's interpretation, I won't go into details, but depending on one's interpretation, I suppose maybe it did work in a roundabout sort of way. I was just experimenting a little bit, and so I tried this method, and
How are you not going
well,
to go into details on the podcast?
I don't want to, would I be cursing myself if I like revealed these personal
Well, like
details?
blowing out the candles and not like don't say the wish. Like, is that what you mean?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. It's really not that interesting. I don't want it to. It was just something like I don't know. This was like 5 or 6 years ago. There was something in my life that I really wanted, and it happened to be during a time when I was reading a lot about the occult and demons. And so I was like, oh, let me try this chaos magic thing out. And so I created a sigil. I created a monogram of what my intention was, and then I stared at it for a long time and tried earnestly, amateur that I am in all of these things. Like I tried earnestly to block out every other intrusive thought and focus solely on the one goal that I wanted. And then I might still have that sigil somewhere. I don't remember what it looks like or anything like that. I just put it with all my papers, and I didn't, like I said, it didn't exactly pan out the way I wanted things to pan out, but it was
So
something I
that's how
tried
you
years
became
ago.
a millionaire. Okay. It's all making sense now.
So yeah, I said all that just to distinguish like historical sigils from like sigils as they are used in the modern day. So if you can't tell, like from all of that, what I just said, modern day sigil use isn't always directly related to demons, but it very much has metaphysical properties. But again, like historically, sigils were associated with like specific demons. So, having said that, moving on to another thing that Alex, you touched on briefly, another method for potentially summoning and controlling demonic entities is the use of Ouija boards. So Ouija boards were created in the 1890s, if I'm not mistaken. When they were created, they weren't taken all that seriously. They were viewed as something like a light parlor game. Really, they weren't treated with any sort of like reverence or you know anything too serious. But it is in the ensuing century, they have become much more prominent in the use of in like supernatural uses. So a Ouija board, if one is not familiar, it's a flat board marked with the letters of the Latin alphabet, the numbers 0 through 9, the words yes, no, and occasionally hello and goodbye, along with various symbols and graphics. It uses a planchette, which is a small heart-shaped piece of wood or plastic, as a movable indicator to spell out messages during a seance. Participants place their fingers on the planchette, and it is moved about the board to spell out words. I thought this was kind of amusing, but the name Ouija is a trademark of Hasbro, but it's also used generically to refer to you know, any talking board used to communicate with spirits. And also, for those who don't know, a seance is an attempt to communicate with the spirits.
One interesting tidbit I saw is how a Ouija board actually got its name. So there's kind of two different claims here. One of them is that the Ouija board named itself. So just think about that for a second.
Yeah.
The other is that Ouija may actually just be a combination of two of the French words for yes, oui and ja. So I don't know exactly where it got its name, but Chops is right. It definitely seemed like it was a parlor trick that has turned into something that seems to be very much in the toolbox of the modern paranormal investigator or maybe occultist even. It's interesting how it's kind of shifted, but it
Yeah, and
probably made somebody a lot of money.
yeah, no doubt. I'm sure Hasbro is stoked. um, yeah, and I question to what degree serious occultists actually use Ouija boards.
Right.
It seems to me, and this is just my gut instinct. This isn't based on like facts per se, but it seems to me like Ouija boards are things that are like played with by like edgy teenagers. I don't know to what extent like occult societies are sitting around using Ouija boards. Maybe they are, right? Like I don't know, but it doesn't. It seems like an amateurish attempt, and not amateurish. You know what I'm trying to say? Like it doesn't strike me as like a particularly sophisticated methodology for communicating with demonic entities, especially when you have things like grimoires and sigils like
Yeah,
the
I
Ouija.
I think it's definitely more used by like paranormal investigators, like I said.
Mm-hmm.
It's just another method, and we'll talk. We can talk about spirit boxes here in a second. Um, But you have these kind of more modern, I don't want to say funner, more fun ways to interact with, these supposed spirits and stuff. But yeah, just to get a little bit into spirit boxes, this is something that probably a lot of our audience has maybe heard of. But more or less, this is the use of like an electronic circuit to kind of supposedly talk to spirits. Usually, what they are circuitry that's designed specifically with like a radio module. So what it does is it actually frequency sweeps. It like sweeps through, from low to high or high to low. It really depends on exactly what the protocol of the device is, what it's doing, if it's sweeping up or down, or if it's random, or how it works. But it uses frequency sweeping, white noise generation, and a couple other things to supposedly allow you to hear bits and pieces of the voices of these spirits. I couldn't really find out why people claim that this works. And it's hard to really pin down what exactly the technology that's being used is. A lot of these spirit box companies, that's kind of their secret sauce. They don't really want to tell you what's exactly happening at a code level. But there's different projects. There's open source spirit boxes out there, but it really is just trying to use this more modern, radio communication. Supposedly spirits can interact or exist in more of a frequency realm than they do in a bodily realm. So they're able to influence these circuits and talk to you through these radio frequencies.
It's interesting. So it's almost like a blending of like occultic thought with it almost seems like like some sort of like scientific methodology. I mean, one might say pseudoscientific, but it seems like it's trying to blend like scientific principles with metaphysical ones, right?
Absolutely. And if you've ever watched like any of the ghost hunting shows, this is very much a very common tool that they use. I would say this and like the IR camera are probably the two most common tools you see. And an IR camera is just a camera that the filter's been removed on to allow IR light to pass through to the sensor. And supposedly these IR cameras, can pick up, once again, things that lay outside of the normally observable frequency range. So,
Mm.
these are the things these cameras supposedly pick up. I don't know how much our audience knows, but like the orbs that float by and, these different, things that paranormal investigators claim are, in fact, spirits, showing themselves.
Yeah, I don't remember the spirit box in particular, but as a child of the aughts, I grew up during the heyday of the Discovery Channel, and I know that Ghost Hunters was definitely something I used to look forward to in the evenings, and I remember them always talking about things like what is it, EVPs, right? Electronic voice phenomenon.
Yep. Yep.
And
That's
I
what this
imagine that's
is.
what. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And now, if
Figured that.
just to get a little more technical with it, some of these spirit boxes, some of the more recent ones, actually, instead of you just hearing, a radio frequency, they actually, I'm not quite sure how they work, but supposedly try to pick out specific words and will display words in a text format on the screen. So these things have evolved over time, from just simple radio frequency sweeping to like actual, you know, like trying to pull words out of it. And I'm sure, and this is an idea I've kind of bounced around with a little bit, is like, how do we incorporate AI into this? And that could be a whole nother discussion. But I think,
Oh, that's interesting.
yeah, if I'm sure that there would be some way to train a model or something to supposedly be better at this than another piece of gear. So
Mhm.
I wouldn't be surprised if we see that angle in the future. I think it would be an interesting angle.
How strange
Yeah.
would that be for a language model to discover some metaphysical phenomenon?
Yeah. I mean,
It's a great use case for large language models, huh?
yeah.
I mean, you already see them being used in things like cancer detection. where they can pick out more subtle patterns quicker
Mm-hmm.
and more efficiently than humans.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's an interesting idea. Also, I like this one as like a more grounded way of kind of pursuing the validity of these things. Um, you know, we obviously are only limited to our physical senses, which are limited. And there's a lot more going on in the physical universe. So, this is a good, in my mind, this is like, I like this as a way to uh, try and pick up anything that might be going on outside of our bodily perception.
Yeah.
Like,
And it's interesting. So people are definitely putting thought into the design of these things. Um, like I was mentioning the radio frequency sweeping. So like I think the early models of this kind of technology just swept forward, right?
mhm,
And so while doing that, people designing these things discovered that if you sweep forward through the frequencies, that it's more likely that you're going to pick up like radio frequencies, from like broadcast radio, and it'll be, more intelligible, actual
mhm,
broadcast music or talk coming through. So what they do is they do like a reverse sweep now, where it sweeps, the opposite way, so it's not as intelligible and you're not getting as many of these false positives. So people are
mm,
definitely trying to put thought into this, and they're constantly evolving. But it's kind of interesting.
Do
mhm.
you know where I could procure one of these spirit boxes out of
Um,
curiosity?
absolutely. So Google, obviously, you can find them online. There are a couple companies that I want to say there's only like two, maybe three companies that really have like a good product on the market. Um, I'm using good in a different way than like in like you know what I'm trying to say here.
Is
Like
Hasbro not in on this yet?
no, no, no. So but they can get pretty pricey. Like they could be
See,
in
that
the
that was
range
my
of a
next
couple
question.
$100.
Wow,
So
interesting. Okay.
we can talk about this off the podcast, but there are some open source projects out there that do it like with an Adreno or a Raspberry Pi, which is just like a very cheap computer. And there's ways to make your own for a lot less money. And if you're just dabbling with this, I would think about maybe going that route. I also want to say there are phone applications, I believe, for both iOS and Android that supposedly do something like this. I don't know that they operate the same because I don't believe that the iPhone or the Android can pick up normal like FM or AM broadcast ranges. I think the antennas are and receivers are too high a frequency. But supposedly there are these applications that can do something similar. So that might be a good place to start, and then look into to building
Interesting.
your own. And then if you're really into it, obviously you can drop a couple $100 and get the quote unquote real deal. But
Hmm. Interesting. I mean, I guess it would be a good tool if you're doing some urban exploring, like abandoned places. Like that'd be a fun
oh
little
yeah,
tool to bring around, right?
oh definitely.
Mm,
Yeah, I've
mm.
definitely watched videos of people using them online, and it's always like you're holding your breath, like waiting. Like they're definitely at the least a fun toy to have, and yeah.
Mm, mm. Interesting. Um, and one final thing that I won't linger on this, but maybe the lowest hanging fruit of methods for summoning um demonic entities would be like the old urban legends we all grew up with, like the Bloody Mary ritual, where I think you're supposed to, if I remember it, I never did it because I was always too scared, but you're supposed to like stand in front of a mirror and turn out all the lights and then like invoke the name of Bloody Mary like however many times, and then she's supposed to manifest in the mirror. But I don't I would question if any serious practitioner of this kind of stuff would take something like that very seriously. But I figured it's worth mentioning, something that the average person's probably aware of.
Yeah, it seems like as a society, this is something that people are always interested in dabbling with. You know, even I even as teenagers, people are messing with this stuff. you know?
Mm-hmm. And honestly, I never really did. Like I always had a curiosity, like with Ouija boards, to try them out, but my mother was always pretty superstitious and like strictly forbade me from ever doing it. And I guess it, like her fear of it, kept me from ever trying it. Have ever you either of you ever tried a Ouija board?
No, I have
No.
not.
Mm-mm.
No.
I've always like my parents always kind of like warned me like don't mess with this stuff, and like we're like, there's not really any good that can come of it, so like why even try it? And like I kind of agree. I don't know how much I believe in it, but it just doesn't seem like a lot of good can really come of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like it seems very if we can just set aside skepticism and assume that these things are real, like why would you think, unless you studied this on an academic level for decades, why would you assume that you could control forces that you really don't understand, right? Like it seems like a naive assumption that you could just like usher up some unknowable entity whose intentions you know nothing about, and that you could just make it do your bidding. It seems like you know it probably isn't real, but on the off chance that it is, it's probably best to stay away.
I have no
Unless
qualms.
you oh,
I'd
do
do it
you?
in a second. I mean,
Cool.
I am so uh completely skeptical of this whole thing that I would have no qualms with going into something like that personally.
Yeah,
I
well,
fear no demons.
well, why don't we dive into that a bit? Our our skepticism or credulity regarding these schools of thought. You know, if you want to kind of kick it off, like you, I take it that you take a pretty staunchly skeptical view of all of these things, right? You don't think there's any merit to any of this.
Correct. Yeah, that's my personal opinion, and
Hmm.
I in the same way that I wouldn't say that something of a religious nature is completely out of the picture because we really don't have the capacity to know. We don't understand the nature of our physical reality to the level that, we can with 100% confidence say that no, this is not real.
Hmm.
However, um I, as I've mentioned before, try and live my life based on a uh evidence-based analysis of the things around me and form my views on um, verifiable information and experience. And
Hmm.
in my life, growing up religious, I really legitimately and open mindedly tried to find something there. And in my experience, there was never anything that I experienced, heard, saw, whatever, that would make me believe in anything of a metaphysical nature. So, uh, until that happens, I I take the view of no, this is not real. And like I said, I wouldn't completely rule it out as a possibility. However, until I see something or feel something or hear something or whatever that is enough to make me really question it, and that something can't be explained by some other uh, physically or scientifically based explanation. I would never, I would never believe in any of this, and I would take part in any of these um, rituals or whatever uh, with no fear, really. I'm
hmm
pretty staunchly convinced that this is a human fabrication, and that there are many other explanations for some of the things that people might use as evidence personally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I take it you have something like equivalent to like an atheistic stance on this, where it's like a rejection of a claim without evidence, right? I guess the burden of proof would be on the one proclaiming the existence of occultic forces, and if and if
Exactly.
and,
Exactly.
and
You
if
know.
their claims don't match up with your conception of what reality is, if they can't demonstrate clearly that any of this has any semblance of reality, then you just reject it outright.
Yes.
If it's okay, fair enough. I mean, fair enough. Um, what's your take on this, Alex?
Um, you know, I've never seen anything as far as like proof. I tried to attack this somewhat from a scientific angle, and there's just not a lot of literature out there that does that. I think a lot of these things, such as possessions, specifically when we're talking about like what was their name, Annalise Mickle and Roland Doe, I think that those can kind of just be chalked up to psychiatric, mental illness,
Mm-hmm.
not being understood, or anybody who's experienced mental illness knows that it can be a pretty frustrating thing. It's not like breaking your leg where you can get an X-ray and they can tell you how to heal it. It's something that oftentimes in today's limited knowledge day and age, is kind of, you got to keep throwing things at the wall to see what sticks. We don't really have it solved yet. So these things can be pretty pesky and hard to get rid of. So turning to something like an exorcism doesn't seem that crazy to me, especially, with the symptoms of some of these things, such as schizophrenia, where you're having potential, auditory, visual, and tactile hallucinations. These are all things that very much seem, if you didn't understand how it worked from a biological or physiological standpoint, very much could seem to be the work of demons. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
I, you know, I kind of think that that's probably where a lot of this comes from. And the further back you go, you see more and more people talking about these things. And that kind of jives up with the fact that as time goes on, we have a better and better understanding of what actually is causing these phenomenons. But at the same time, um, like I said, I don't really necessarily believe it because there's not really scientific literature on it. It's not, I don't disbelieve it enough that I would just willy nilly be willing to try these things. Um, I don't really see enough of a benefit other than like, I mean, the only benefit I can see is like, oh, look, I'm cool. I'm impressing my friends. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I just, it just, the consequences versus what you have to gain just don't seem, the ratio seems off for me. It wouldn't be something that I would try just out of the small sliver of a chance that it could be real. These things, according to the literature that we've looked at, seem to be sometimes incredibly hard to get rid of and incredibly disruptive in life. Not saying that that is necessarily true, but just, I don't know. It just doesn't.
Right.
It's just not enough for me to like want to try. Like I'll leave it to somebody else to try, and if I just don't, there's not really a great benefit here. One of the other things too, and I don't know how good of an argument this is against it, but if this was real, don't you like, I've been on these magic with a K subreddits, and like, don't you think that these people would be like incredibly wealthy? Like,
Mm,
is that, I don't know if that's like too weak of an argument, but like, okay, that's a pretty basic thing that humans want, is like, you want like, you know, a significant other of some type, a hot wife, and you want a lot of money and cars, right? Those are like, I would say 99% of people are like, yeah, that's like what I want, right? It's like, wouldn't all these people on the Reddit just be posting their Ferraris all day long?
hmm,
Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's never that. It's never that. And
yeah.
so I feel just, it kind of feels like the time travel argument. Like, if time travel existed, we would have seen it. It's like, I just don't, these people don't seem to be doing incredibly well in life. And I'm not saying that they're not, but they don't seem to be above the normal, bell curve here. So I really wonder, and that's great if these people find meaning in this, like people find meaning in, more normal religion. That's I think that's completely fine. Like, you're completely free to do that, and if that brings you some wholeness or, understanding to what you think life is, by all means, you do you. But I just nothing that I've seen has been enough to convince me, like, hey, like, this is the way. Like, you wanna be successful in life. Like, I got the secret. I just don't
Well,
see it.
one counter that popped in my head to that is
Sure.
if uh, if accusations from a lot of the fringe corners of the internet are to be believed, most of Hollywood and successful politicians are in fact occultists. So,
Yeah,
and maybe it's just a matter of how adept you are. Maybe the people lurking on Reddit who are on these subreddits are just like amateur normies in the occult world, and they haven't ascended to the proper um, echelons of like mastering these practices, and
yeah.
uh
I mean,
maybe
it's
the
a
masters are, the Pope and Joe Biden and Bill Gates, that they're the masters of this. I don't know.
yeah. I mean, it's definitely a fun thought to have. Trust me, I've had it quite a bit. Right?
Yeah,
I run in
yeah,
these
yeah.
these radical conspiracy circles online, and obviously this is something that's been echoed a lot. Um, but I just don't know. It just doesn't seem real. It just doesn't. I don't know.
With demonology and demons in particular, the thing that that makes me, you know, my conviction so strong to the point where I would gladly, for the sake of showing how, you know, strong my belief is that this is not a real phenomena, is that it's all within the context of religion, right? Like, there's not really much of a demon without a god or an angel, right? Like, that is kind of at the core what a demon is. It's like the antithesis of this metaphysical presence of goodness. And to me, it seems like if this was if there was some sort of evil spiritual side of the metaphysical world, it would be a lot easier and uh to verify that there is a good in force of the same type. And if people are not hearing from that side of the metaphysical world, I really just don't see why you would dive so far into dealing with the evil side of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So why? What do you think? Why do people engage in this? Is it just because um, it's edgy? Is it because um,
I think
I don't
that's
know, like
part of it. I think a lot of it probably has to do with, like, somewhat of, like, the community feeling. Like, people, I think, at least I think, inherently are, like, seeking community, and whether
Mhm.
that's, a lot of these practices are done on an individual level. They're not always done in mass, um, but you feel connected to those around you, right? And I think that community mixed with curiosity, and, just i- the denying of what you've been told, which I guess, is edginess, kind of,
Mhm.
drives a lot of people to look at these alternative lifestyles and alternative things. And, people are always wanting to better their chances in life at being success, whatever that may be for them. And when somebody tells you something like this, um, it can seem kind of sexy. It can seem like a shortcut. And I think a lot of people would want to take the shortcut if they could. And I think the fact that it's just draped in this demonic imagery, um, just makes it very alluring for people. Like,
Mhm.
you feel, you've just been built up your whole life. A lot of us, at least in the Western world, that religion's real, and, Jesus and God and, Christianity and all these things. And then you see, you know, like I said, these devils and demons. It's like, it appears very interesting, and maybe the shortcut because it's been suppressed and kept from you.
Mhm.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
definitely
I
think
think
the secrecy is probably another draw, right? Because a lot of these practices are done in occultic circles, and the very definition of occult is, hidden,
right. I
that
think a
which
lot
is
of
obscure.
people find the kind of alternative path very alluring. You know, the idea of like being kind of contrarian to the general belief system is for a lot of people really self-gratifying. You feel like you're taking part in like a hidden knowledge or something that others are kind of mocking or aren't really privy to, and that makes you feel a little bit special and like you found the way where everyone else is going the opposite way. And I think there's an aspect of that to it for some people. I think also some people just have a taste for a darker, more morbid aesthetic.
Absolutely.
And, you know, and,
Hmm.
I respect that. Um, like I think it's cool. But yeah, in terms of why people really throw their all into it, I think you guys are right. I agree with everything you said. And I think that there's no one reason, but it's a combination of all of these reasons.
Hmm. But it is interesting to see that, like, it from where I sit, it seems like occult practices are uh quietly thriving around the world.
Hmm.
Um, and the fact that it's still so, prevalent underneath, in the underbelly of mainstream society, I find very curious.
Hmm.
I'm like, what's all the chutzpah about? Like, what's the deal? Like, it makes me want to know. I guess that very point is why so many people get drawn into it.
Right, right. And I imagine that there is a good portion that feels a certain way about traditional religious views, and probably there's some amount of, you know, um, backlash against that sort of thinking. Um,
Totally, like we were
you
saying
know.
earlier, like, a lot of the Satanism movements of the 20th century, like I said before, feel come off as very reactionary. You know,
Mhm.
it's kind of just a way to trigger the religious minded among us.
Right. And honestly, I see these two ways of belief, both religious, traditionally religious, and the dark demon worshipping Satan sect as very similar. Like I think that ultimately they believe the things that they believe based on very similar um values and similar claims about the nature of reality. And it's funny to me that uh they don't, they don't respect each other. Yeah, I mean, obviously they're in diametrically opposed sides of the spectrum, but they're all a part of the same world, you know?
So it's two sides of the same coin that you just full stop reject.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
one interesting thing too, and like this is a bit of a thought experiment, and I don't mean to offend anybody on the podcast who believes in either of these things. Um, but one thing I've thought about is like, we've all been to a Christian mass before, right? Here, I think.
Yeah.
Um, if you were to just remove the Christian part of that, and you're showing up at this church, this like strange building, and somebody's telling you to drink the body or drink the blood and eat the body of this person, and it's like if you just remove this like deeply seated understanding of it, it feels kind of weird, man.
Mhm.
Like it's
Yeah.
just it's very accepted because it's just stood the test of time, but it's like still deeply ritualistic and like kind of
Absolutely.
weird, you know?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yep, totally.
Yeah, I think that's, why a lot of Christians ended up rejecting Catholicism for many reasons, but
Hmm.
among them would be like the the almost creepy ritualistic nature of sorry if there's any Catholics listening, but the heavy ritualistic nature of certain aspects of Catholicism. I think I think that a lot of the Protestant Reformation happened as a renunciation of that,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, it does kind of come off kind of culty, doesn't it?
And they pass around that dish and you put money in it. I mean,
Yeah, really though.
Yeah, and I think both ways of thinking are, just another way of people trying to deal with the lack of true understanding we have about reality in the world, And I respect that, people feel that way, um, and pursue these things, like I've expressed. I personally am not a believer in it. I won't come out and like fully reject it as a completely 0% possibility, that something more metaphysical is going on, but, I personally don't see it. But I think, like people find, even if it's the darker demon side of it, people find solace in the belief, like in acknowledging that there is something out there that explains what it all is. Because fundamentally, um, with demonology and like demon summoning or whatever bent you take, you're giving yourself a sense of security in the fact that you understand pretty much how, like, what life is about, right? You get rid of all the anxiety that comes from being like, I don't know what this all is. None of us know what this all is. I don't know what's going to happen after I die. I don't know what if there's anything larger controlling the outcomes of my life or my actions or how well I do or whatever. And this can give people a psychological like sense of security and peace about it, I think.
Hmm.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Which, like, respect for that. Like, if that is how you find, if that is the way that you find peace in this life and you deal with, if you have issues with anxiety about the unknowns and you find solace in adhering to something that gives you that sense of peace, then by all means, as long as it doesn't fuck with me, go for it.
And see, this is why, if there's anyone listening who is a practitioner of the occult, who believes earnestly these things, please reach out.
Mm.
I would love, because I think it's safe to say, to summarize it, that we're all more or less on the same page. We all three of us err very much on the side of skepticism with these things. But if there's anyone out there who's listening who is like, oh, these three clowns, they really are dropouts. They don't know what they're talking about. Like, I welcome that discussion earnestly.
Hmm.
I would absolutely love to have an open-minded discussion in the future on this podcast with someone who believes these things and can make a compelling case for it. Would love to have that discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure all three of us are in agreement about that,
Yeah, I just
And
want
I
to
don't.
understand why people
Right.
believe what they believe.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
absolutely.
I don't intend at all to mock people who believe these things with the things that I say. I'm just expressing my opinions, but ultimately, I respect everyone's opinions about this stuff, and I'm also on board with the fact that I just want to learn more, about where you're coming from, your frame of reference, what causes you to believe these things, what spurs the conviction, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, please open invitation to anyone who's listening, and and who believes these things, I would absolutely love just to have an open-minded discussion on it, because I find the topic, whether or not I personally believe in it, I find the topic fascinating. I find the phenomenon of demon worship and occultism in general to be a very fascinating, like, weird little left field aspect of the world.
Left hand, I
And
think, is the proper term.
nice, nice, nailed it. So yeah, anyone who's listening, if you want to jump in at some point, talk to us, please reach out to us. I would love to have you on and just have a discussion about it.
Mhm.
There's no vitriol or anything like that. Just want to have a discussion. Like Brandon said, just want to learn more.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think that we're pretty much all on the same page here. And I think that's just about everything that I have on this topic. Unless there's anything that either of you have that you'd like to throw into the mix.
I don't think so.
No.
Yeah. Well, I think that about wraps her up.
Indeed.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for listening to this episode. 10 episodes. 10
Yeah.
episodes.
Here's to 100 more.
Hey.
We're gonna run out of topics.
Just gotta look
Challenge
harder.
accepted. Yeah, challenge
Yeah.
accepted. Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. Until next time, we are the Mystery School Dropouts. Thank you for listening.
Goodbye.